Sleep is something we all need, but for many women in midlife, it becomes something we chase. I know this experience all too well. As a busy mother of three, balancing the demands of running a business and trying to be everything for everyone around me, sleep often felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. I thought it was normal to feel wired and tired, constantly running on adrenaline in the name of productivity. But then perimenopause arrived, suddenly and without warning, and it became my real wake-up call. What followed was a new level of fatigue, disrupted sleep, mood swings, and a growing sense of disconnection I could no longer push through. And I've learned, both personally and professionally, that sleep isn't just about rest. It affects every part of how we show up in our lives. Our energy, our memory, our mood, our relationships, and yes, even our capacity for pleasure and intimacy. If your sleep has gone completely off track, you are not alone. And today's conversation will give you practical, proven strategies to start turning things around. No drastic life overhauls required. And while we've explored sleep and rest on the podcast before, I'm bringing it back because I hear time and time again from women in this community. They feel wired and tired and stretched thin, and sleep continues to be the one symptom they just can't seem to get under control. And with March being World Sleep Month, it feels like the perfect time to revisit this essential topic from a fresh angle with new insights and practical strategies that meet you right where you are. Welcome to Pleasure in the Pause, a podcast dedicated to empowering midlife women to connect with their bodies, pleasure, and power in perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. I am your host, Gabriella Espinosa, women's health and sexual wellness coach, and it is my pleasure to be here with you today. Let's be honest, few challenges are more universal or more frustrating than not being able to sleep. That's why I'm so excited to be joined by Morgan Adams, a certified holistic sleep coach who helps women get their sleep back on track without relying on medications or gimmicks. Morgan's been there herself, and she brings a no-nonsense, science-backed, deeply compassionate approach to something we all need more of. In today's episode, Morgan and I talk about what daily habits, hormone shifts, and lifestyle patterns might be standing in the way of better sleep, what you need to know about melatonin, sleep aids, and whether or not your sleep tracker is helping or hurting. And most importantly, how to begin making simple, sustainable changes that can have a real impact on your sleep, your energy, and your overall quality of life. If you've been wondering whether a good night's sleep is still possible in this season of life, Morgan is here to tell you, yes, it is. And she's got some brilliant strategies to prove it. So let's get into it. Welcome, Morgan, to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here with you, Gabriella.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Sleep, as we know, is something we all have in common. But for so many women, especially during the menopause transition, sleep can feel more like a battle than a luxury. I hear from women all the time, and I myself have not been exempt from those restless nights, staring at the ceiling, waking up at 3 a.m. with your mind racing, or just dragging through the day, even though you technically gotten enough hours in bed. We know that sleep is the foundation of how we experience life, our energy, mood, hormones, and yes, our capacity for pleasure. So I want to start first by asking you, you are a double certified holistic sleep coach who's not just an expert, but you've also been through the trenches yourself. So let's start at the beginning. What was your personal journey with sleep, and how did it inspire you to become a holistic sleep coach for women?
Yes, you described it very aptly. I have been through the trenches, Gabriella. That all started for me about 20 years ago. So in my mid 30s, I had a pretty bad bout of insomnia called sleep onset insomnia, which is just a fancy way to say I had a hard time falling asleep initially in the beginning of the night. I was going through a relationship challenge and I would lie awake most nights, tossing and turning, waiting for sleep to happen. Took me usually 1 to 2 hours to fall asleep most nights. And after about 2 months of this, I said, I've got to do something about it because it was really impacting me. So I went to my primary care doctor and was prescribed Ambien, which is a really commonly used sleep aid. And At that time in my life, I was a pharmaceutical sales representative. So my currency was medications. So I thought nothing of it to accept a medication to help me with this. Took the medication as directed, and it did work in terms of getting me to sleep more quickly, but I paid on the back end. I had a lot of residual side effects the next day. We could delve more into the sleeping pills issue later if you want, but I just sucked it up and dealt with those side effects for many years. And then one day I met a new guy who is now my husband. And during the early stages of our relationship, he said to me, when you take that pill to fall asleep, you become like a zombie and it freaks me out. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's right. Like these pills are really not serving me very well. So I had made the decision to stop taking the pills. And I did what I do not recommend anyone else do, and that is just cold turkey yourself and do this without your prescribing provider. Definitely, whether you're on your sleep medication, psychiatric, or any other medication, have your doctor provide some kind of exit strategy for you. But I did it my way and I didn't know any better, got through it okay, and then slept well for years. Then there was a plot twist, and that plot twist was something we all experienced collectively in March of 2020, right when the pandemic hit. I was starting to suffer with my sleep again because of all the anxieties and the unknowns. And I decided I am not going back to that world of insomnia that I knew very well. So I got myself an Aura ring. I started to research sleep, Googling how to sleep better. And in pretty short order, I got my sleep back on track. And I was excited about that. And I started posting organically on Facebook, like things I was doing to fix my sleep. And I came to find out that a lot of other women in my circle during this time were struggling with their sleep as well. So I thought, this is very interesting that so many of us are having trouble sleeping. So backtracking 2 years before that, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that wasn't related to my sleep at all. But the breast cancer did serve as was a big reminder of, hey, you're in midlife. What are you going to do with the rest of your life that gives you a sense of purpose and meaning? And I knew I wanted to help women with their health. And when I got this kind of fascination with sleep brewing in 2020, I was just like all the stars aligned. And I was like, I'm going to be a sleep coach for women. So I launched this practice in 2021. Obviously, I had to go through some studying and certification to get there. But since then, I have been helping women get better sleep, overcoming insomnia without having to rely on medications. And it's been quite an amazing journey doing this.
I want to unpack so many of the things you mentioned because, yes, you've experienced what we all experienced, as you said, collectively, the COVID, and we continue to experience things collectively. I had previously on the show Dr. Narina Ramlakan, who talked to how big trauma and little trauma affects us at a deep nervous system level, and that can impact our sleep. You have dealt with diagnoses like cancer. You've been on sleep medications. I imagine you've had your own journey with sleep as you move through perimenopause and menopause. Are you going through that transition now?
Yeah, I was going through it for a couple years. I've figured out some things and doing better now. But yeah, that hit me for
Yeah.
sure. It hasn't been a linear journey. There's been little twists and turns along the way, for
Yeah.
sure.
And so, what have you learned through your own journey about how sleep impacts not only our physical, but our mental and emotional well being? Why is the quality of sleep so essential for all of these aspects of our health, especially for women in midlife?
Yeah. So if we think about the physical aspects of getting quality sleep, we really think about our brain. And we have something called the lymphatic system, which is like the lymphatic system, but it's in your brain. And it's a waste management system, if you will. Imagine your brain overnight while you're sleeping in deep sleep. It's like a car wash wringing out those toxins. And that's a really critical aspect of sleep that we rely on for just feeling refreshed and having great cognitive function. We also really need that sleep for, I guess, a relationship salve, if you will, SALV. And what I mean by that is when we are sleeping, it enables us to really have some emotional regulation through the REM stages. That is like what Matthew Walker calls overnight therapy. So when we are dysregulated sometimes during the day, often that can reflect back on not enough REM sleep because we are too emotionally labile, right? So I think this is an area of sleep that isn't talked about enough, the social aspect of getting quality sleep.
Could you just tell us what REM sleep is?
There's a few stages of sleep, but the REM sleep and the deep sleep are the two that we're really looking at more closely as the most health promoting stages of sleep. And the REM sleep is roughly about 25% of our sleep for a healthy adult. And it happens primarily on the latter part of the night, midnight and beyond. It's usually when there's more REM sleep. And it's responsible for consolidating memory, emotional regulation. Whereas deep sleep is happening primarily in the first half of the night. That's when we see most of the deep sleep happen. And that's roughly 20% of our sleep for a healthy adult. Now, side note, as we get older into midlife, that deep sleep starts to peter out, which I think it's important to realize so that we don't have the expectations that we're going to have the deep sleep of the 30-year-old. But the deep sleep is the stage of sleep that you really think about when you're thinking about bodily repair, tissue repair, the brain cleansing, like I just mentioned, the good brain cleansing, not the bad one, and hormone regulation, cardiovascular health, hormone health, all of those bodily functions are really getting honed in with the deep sleep. So that's just a little background on the stages.
Okay. And so that REM sleep you mentioned earlier is essential for this social connection, this sense of being at ease with ourselves and the world around us, which can I imagine affects our mood and our sense of being present with other people and our ability to show up at work and do the kind of work we need to do. Is that right?
Yeah, the REM sleep is primarily this stage of sleep that is really more reflective of the emotional stability. So if you are snapping at people at your house or you're snapping at your coworkers, you might not have gotten enough REM sleep. But what's really interesting about sleep is that the social aspect is really not talked about enough. And they've done studies looking at cooperation. They found that people who were sleep deprived are less likely to donate to charity. They're less likely to help out a stranger who needs help with something. And people in the workplace, I think that there's been such a hustle culture with the work world, the corporate world. And I think slowly but surely, the message about sleep is getting into the workplace culture, and people are starting to value it more and really poo-pooing the whole burning the candle at both ends, because what we know is that when we have a well-rested workforce, people are getting along better. People are more likely to play well with others, if you will, and just be more pleasant in general. So there's that social lubrication, if you will, of getting good sleep that I don't think gets enough airtime these
Yeah,
days.
no, that's such a good point because that you hear so much about how that aspect of social connection is such a important marker of longevity. And so if we're not getting enough sleep and we're not really cultivating those social connections, it can impact our health and longevity. So how do we get that deep REM sleep?
There are several different ways we can do that. Now, I'd like to talk about sleep more holistically versus saying what gives you more REM versus more deep, because you can do a lot of interventions, but at the end of the day, when your head hits the pillow, your brain is going to do what it's going to do, right? It's a little bit hard to tweak those different stages. But what I will say from the perspective of someone who's very concerned with deep sleep as a midlife woman, some of the things that I'm finding helpful, and this is backed up in the research for the deep sleep component, we know that eating earlier, we have a lot of data from sleep trackers, and there have been some studies showing that if you leave a longer window between your last meal and bed, you're probably going to get deeper sleep. And I've even experimented with this myself. I've tried eating at 5, having my best deep sleep earlier tends to be better for deep sleep. Keeping your sleeping environment cool tends to help with deep sleep and getting more of it. And then exercise is another one. They've done a meta analysis of 13 different studies showing that exercise helps with our deep sleep. And that's even more poignant in midlife, that exercise component of helping us with our deep sleep. Those are some tips because I know a lot of my ladies in midlife who are working with me are tracking their sleep. And they're like, my deep sleep just isn't what it used to be. And
Mhm.
those are some strategies we can implement. But like I said, at the end of the day, there's only so many interventions you can do because you can set the stage, but the brain is going to take charge overnight and do its thing.
Those are some great suggestions, and I'd love to talk to you about sleep trackers in a little bit. When we are struggling with sleep and trying to figure out why, how do we get started? What is the first step in understanding our own sleep patterns? How can we begin to identify the personal obstacle standing between ourselves and deeper restorative sleep? You mentioned looking at meal times, which is a great suggestion, movement, but where do we get started?
Yeah, I think really the best place to start, Gabriella, with a sleep journey is starting with optimizing our circadian rhythm because good sleep is actually an output of strong circadian rhythm. And I like to start with circadian rhythm because and I'll share some of the techniques. Largely, these are things that are within our control and that we have agency over. So if I was a woman in midlife and I was like, I want to get better sleep, I would really start with a few things. Number one, I would make sure that I was getting proper daylight exposure in the morning. So
Mm.
we really need to be exposing ourselves to natural light in the morning around the time of sunrise or a little bit after. It depends. The sunrise is a moving target throughout the year, but essentially, shortly after you wake up, you want to make sure you get out and you're exposing your naked eyes to the natural light. In other words, leave the sunglasses at home. And the reason I say this, and I'm so adamant about the sunglasses, is because if you've got something shielding your eyes, you're depriving yourself of the light hitting your retina. Once the light hits your retina, it sends this signal to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is your circadian pacemaker. And that signals this beautiful cascade of neurotransmitters and hormones that are happening. So the shielding of your eyes really just deprives your body of those
Mhm.
benefits. So spending 10, 15 minutes in that natural light is really working wonders for strengthening your circadian rhythm, letting your body know, hey, it's morning now. It's time to start setting the clock. So when you're getting that light, you're pretty much helping your body regulate that cortisol melatonin pulse. So the cortisol gets boosted naturally when you get that natural sun in the morning. And then it's also preparing the melatonin for the night upcoming. So it's really cool the way it works. And then, really, the second thing I would do to entrain the circadian rhythm is pick a very consistent wake up time because your body definitely needs that regularity. And I think as a society, get a little bit haywire with our sleep wake cycle. It can get really inconsistent if we're not careful. So that wake up time really anchors us. And one of the beautiful things about the consistent wake up time is that it allows our bodies to get sleepy around the same time each night. So we have this sleep chemical called adenosine. We have basically expelled all the adenosine out of our body during our sleep overnight. And then about 16, 17 hours after we've woken up, that adenosine buildup happens and it needs to be released in sleep. So by default, if you're waking up around the same time every morning, you're going to likely get sleepy around the same time each night. So that kind of sets you into that regularity pattern.
When we're talking about sunlight exposure, does that mean literally looking up at the sun? We're still in winter months here in February. I know we'll probably post this episode in March, so we'll start getting more sunlight. But can it mean just looking out a window, or does it literally mean going outside? Can it be sitting on your porch or back patio? What exactly does that direct sun exposure look like?
That is a beautiful question. So windows, unfortunately, don't really count. So the windows are blocking a lot of that light out. If you can get outside, even if you're on a front porch, you don't have to leave your front porch if you don't want to. I have a lot of clients who will implement this practice of natural light. They will set their chair up on their porch and they'll drink their morning coffee
Mm.
while sitting there. You really shouldn't look directly at the sun. It's a little too bright, but just being like having no windows and between you and the outside is really what you're looking for. I personally like the walk because it's important to get some movement in the morning just to get everything going. I'm a big fan of habit stacking. So getting outside and getting the light plus the movement is like a great habit stack for most people.
So that's a great way of doing those two things, getting that light exposure and some movement in the body. And can you talk to us a little bit about adenosine? I've heard you speak about this before, about building up your reserves of adenosine throughout the day, and how can we do that?
Yeah. So adenosine is built up through the day and you build it up more with more activity. So, one of the reasons why exercise is so effective for sleep is because the exercise really builds up that adenosine more. And like I mentioned, at about 16 or 17 hours after you've woken up is when the adenosine needs to be released in the form of like your 8-ish hours of sleep.
Okay, wonderful. So we've talked about getting outside and getting some sun exposure, getting up at the same time every day. Any other strategies that we can do to make sure we get that restful, deep sleep?
Yeah. So, there are a couple more, but one of the ones I'll mention on the lines of the circadian optimization piece is having a lot of regularity about when you eat your meals. So, what I recommend to most people is having breakfast. I know intermittent fasting has been like a trend for a really long time. And I think it's starting to fall out of favor a little bit, at least in terms of the intermittent fasting that's been popular, which has been delaying your breakfast and like having lunch and not having that morning meal. So, what a lot of people are talking about now in the circadian health space is the importance of having your first meal within an hour of sunrise because it's signaling to your body that, hey, it is morning and it's time to do those daytime processes. So it's quite a great flex for hormone balance to have the breakfast and then having your meals eaten around the same time each day. So I know it's hard with our schedules to have like on the dot, on the hour, but if we can aim to have our meals within like an hour range. So like breakfast from 8 to 9, lunch 12 to 1, and dinner 5 to 6. That would set you up for a really good meal timing. So with circadian fasting, what we're also looking at is not having meals or not having food after the sun goes down. Our bodies are really not designed to process that food late into the night. We've definitely seen lots of studies circulating lately about metabolic health being better when we're eating during the daylight hours. So essentially, I think we overcomplicate it, the whole circadian eating concept. Essentially, what you want to remember is try to eat your meals only when the sun is up. And I know that can be a little challenging at some times of the year, but for example, here where I live, it was getting dark like around 5, and was a little bit early for me and my husband to be eating dinner because we weren't ready to eat it. We weren't doing the stuff, waiting a little bit, but trying to eat as close to getting that last meal in, close to the sunset as you can versus eating at like 8 or 9.
It seems like it takes quite a bit of discipline and organization and structure in your day to make sure that you start these habits that lead to better sleep.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it does take some discipline, but I think once people start these habits, and they're for the most part accessible to all of us, and pretty much everything I've said has been free. You're not limited with finances here. This is what I'm finding with my clients because I'm suggesting these things to them. And sometimes I get some pushback, right? Because people are like, I want to sleep in on the weekend, or it's too cold to go outside. Once people start doing the interventions that I just mentioned, they become almost addicted to them in terms of they realize they're experiencing the benefits for themselves in terms of better sleep, better mood, better metabolism. And so, because they're seeing these small changes, they're more motivated to stick with it and make it really a part of their routine. And I want to mention one tool that people can lean in on, and it's a free tool that I recently found. It's an app called My Circadian app. And there
Mhm.
is a version. I can share the promo code with you to give you a free month, but it's a new app that you enter your geography, your city, and it will give you this dashboard of when the different times of day are happening. So it'll tell you when sunrise is. It'll tell you when something called UVA rise is. And UVA rise comes right after sunrise. And that's when the sun is between a 10 and 30-degree angle from the earth. That's a time period that's a moving target, but essentially it's about an hour to 2 hours after sunrise. And you're getting like a lot of really potent benefits when you're exposed to that light. For example, it's basically you have these amino acids in your eyes that capture photons of light and then transform tryptophan into serotonin. It transforms tyrosine into norepinephrine and dopamine for happiness and motivation. So there are all these really cool things going on. So you can use that app to figure out when that time frame is. For me, for example, I will plan my mornings so that I can get 10 minutes of that UVA light exposure. So I'll make myself have a break so I can get outside and get those benefits. And with this app, you can also see when the sunset is so that you can alert yourself to start dimming the lights in your house. And there's a whole bunch of other features in the app that I won't go into now, but it's a tool that a lot of my clients have enjoyed using because it takes the guesswork out of the timing
Yeah,
piece.
exactly. I love that these little reminders of when you should be doing all of these things, exposing yourself to light or eating at the end of the day when the sun goes down. So I love that. I'll definitely add that to the show notes. And thank you so much for sharing your promo code so we can access it for free for a month. Try it out. Another tool that I wanted to talk to you about is the sleep tracking device, the Aura Ring, which they seem to be everywhere these days. How do these devices actually work, and do you recommend them for women struggling with sleep?
They work basically by tracking some of the parameters of your sleep. When you fall asleep, when you wake up, your REM sleep, your deep sleep, your light sleep, it'll measure areas of what they call readiness, so heart rate variability, body temperature. You can get a really good snapshot of your general health by looking at this as well as your sleep health. I'm a fan of these tools, and I'm actually a little embarrassed to admit I have 4 sleep trackers. Don't recommend the normal person. I am not normal, but I don't recommend people have multiple ones, but it is my job to stay on top of this. So I do what I need to do my job. But sleep trackers can be a great tool for a lot of people. I would recommend them for people who are entering a sleep optimization journey and they want to start honing in on getting better sleep. If you are the kind of person who can look at the data and then make decisions about your behavior based on the data, then you're probably a pretty good candidate for that. For example, a lot of clients will notice that if I eat late or if I have alcohol, my sleep quality goes down. Okay, so what do you do with that data? If you don't do anything with that data, then you're probably wasting your money on a sleep tracker, to be honest. But if you're able to notice these trends and then make changes, like maybe I'll have my cocktail at 5 instead of 8, or maybe I'll eat dinner at 5 instead of 8. And you're like, okay, my sleep is improving, then that's probably a really good investment of your money and time to have a sleep tracker. But for a lot of the clients that I work with who have insomnia, they have a lot of anxiety attached to their sleep. And so sometimes what I find is the sleep trackers will backfire on people who have insomnia because they're often already very antsy and potentially overreactive about their scores in the morning. And seeing a score that isn't great will get them even more anxious. And if we're anxious, we're not going to sleep as well. There is, though, a caveat. So there are people out there who have something called paradoxical insomnia. What that is basically is if you were saying to somebody, I only got 3 hours of sleep. However, if you tracked your sleep, what you would realize is you got 6 hours. So, in those types of scenarios, sleep trackers can be validating for some people because it can allow them to really understand that they got more sleep than they thought they did, right? So, they can be valuable tools for them. So, yeah, that's my take on sleep trackers. And then for the people who are like in the middle ground where they're like getting a little bit obsessive about the numbers, I recommend what I call the middle ground approach. And that's basically wear your sleep tracker every night, but only look at the data once a week so that you get a little bit of distance from it and you're able to look at trends over time versus each day's headlines. That can alleviate some of the anxiety and the obsessiveness.
That's great advice. I like that. Yeah, because I think I would be one of those people who would obsess over the data, waking up every morning checking. But yeah, just ignoring that until the end of the week when you can just have a little look at it and assess what you could improve on or what you could take away in terms of your diet or stressors. I like that. I've been thinking about getting one. I actually think they look nice on the finger. I love the look and style and shape of it. That's something that I may consider getting. Why don't we talk about sleep supplements? I hear a lot of conflicting advice about melatonin. Can you talk to us about melatonin specifically, how it works naturally in the body, and whether or not it is a good supplement, especially for menopausal women? I know some people swear by it, others say it's ineffective or even risky long term.
Yeah. Melatonin is one of those topics that is, I think, the most divisive topic in the sleep field right now. And you've got people who are like really opposed to it, and you've got people who are huge proponents of it. I tend to veer over into the proponent side of things, but we need to be careful though with the melatonin that we choose. So there's a lot of brands out there that are not actually advertising their products correctly. There was a study years ago where they pulled random melatonin bottles from the shelves of Canada, grocery stores and pharmacies. And what they found was that often the amount in the melatonin was not what was advertised on the bottle. So there was a lot less or up to 478% more. Now, 478% more isn't going to harm you, but it could leave you very groggy in the morning. So you want to make sure if you are going to take melatonin that you buy a brand that's reputable. Pharmaceutical grade brands are better in terms of quality than a big box brand like a Costco kind of brand. So that's something to consider for sure, is the quality, and that goes for all supplements. I think that there is an actual use case for women in midlife using melatonin. And here's why I say this is because we do know that as we get into our 50s and beyond, we have endogenous melatonin production starts to wane. It starts to decline. You can see it on a graph. And somebody called it once melatonopause. And I thought, that isn't that clever? Because that's exactly what's happening. So I do believe there is a good use case for people over 50 supplementing with smaller doses of melatonin to just replace what they've lost. But I think that what we really need to consider is to try to preserve our natural melatonin as much as possible. Before we delve into the supplementation, let's make sure that we get our light environment. And I touched on that a little bit earlier, and that involves getting that natural sunlight in the morning to help us produce our natural melatonin. But it also involves being really mindful of our evening environment and the blue light that we're exposed to and the overhead LED lights that are in modern homes. We really want to make sure that our lighting environment is right a couple hours before bed so that we can preserve that natural melatonin as much as possible. To me, that's the foundation. And then if you've dialed that in, then maybe you're ready to supplement with a small amount of melatonin.
That's great advice. And any particular dosage you would recommend starting with?
Yeah, I'd recommend starting with something like there's a product that I use personally called Herbatonin. It's a plant melatonin made of alfalfa, chlorella, rice. And again, I can provide a link and a discount to that. But they actually studied it up against synthetic melatonin brands, and they found that it had infinitely more antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties and no synthetic ingredients that could be harmful. And with that brand, I'm thinking like point 0.3 is a good starting point. I think it'd go to 3. So 3 is really more advertised for like jet lag and circadian rhythm. So I think starting lower is probably a wiser idea at the point 0.3 milligrams. Interesting thing though is that when you look at melatonin brands, they often sell them in very large quantities, 5, 10. That can be maybe a little bit much for the average person. It is a very potent antioxidant and is often used outside of sleep. So when I had breast cancer, they were prescribing like 20 milligrams for me. We think of melatonin for sleep, but there's so many more uses for it than just sleep. And One of the myths that I do want to address, though, with melatonin, and this is why people get so scared of it, I think, they have this conception that if I take melatonin, that means I'm not going to be able to produce my own melatonin, which is actually false. They've done a lot of studies showing that even with higher doses of melatonin, taking that away abruptly does not impact your endogenous production. So that's something that I think needs to be cleared as far as an urban myth about melatonin.
Thank you for that. And is there a particular time when it's best to take melatonin? Is it right before bed, or if we want to sync with our circadian rhythms, do we do it earlier?
Yeah, interesting question. There's been a lot of debate about that. I did see a meta analysis recently where they pulled together many studies and they came to the conclusion in this particular meta analysis that taking melatonin 3 hours before bed is the best timing. Now, if you are thinking about shifting your circadian rhythm, so people who have something called circadian rhythm disorders, either advanced or delayed, those are like extreme night owls and extreme morning types. There's a specific melatonin protocol that they follow that is a lot different than the 3 hours before bed. But for somebody who is looking to maintain their circadian rhythm, that's what this study showed was like about 3 hours before bed, which is a little bit different than what most people do tend to take. They take
Mhm.
their melatonin right before bed. So I'm coaching people to maybe try starting a little bit earlier. I've been experimenting with this myself since I got that meta-analysis in my inbox.
So would taking it with dinner help?
It could potentially. It could. I would say it's worth experimenting with and being your N of 1. But I was intrigued by that meta-analysis, and that same meta-analysis actually showed that 4 milligrams was the ideal dose, which I was surprised because I thought, "That's a little bit high," but that's what the meta-analysis showed, so
Well, I think as with all supplements or medications, even with hormone therapy, I think often the recommendation is starting at the lowest dose and then slowly tapering up. Yeah, your recommendations to start at that low dose is a good idea. You mentioned that it has other benefits besides sleep, and you mentioned that it's often recommended to women who are going through cancer treatment or recovery. We know for this population, sleep can be especially challenging. I know you've had your own personal experience with cancer recovery. What advice do you have for women navigating a cancer journey who want to improve their sleep during or after treatment?
I would say really be protective of your light environment. So they've done a lot of studies. In fact, there's a book called The Light Doctor, and he shares many studies supporting that there's a correlation between highly lit populations and breast cancer. I would say that for some, and I didn't know this when I was going through breast cancer. And quite honestly, I'm not really even that aware of my light environment in that at that time. I don't think I was very aware of it. But essentially, what we want to be doing is dimming the lights and being careful about the blue light exposure because that can be somewhat of a risk factor for getting breast cancer. This is where it gets interesting. They've done studies where they have looked at shift workers, so women who are working overnights and their melatonin gets incredibly impacted and they tend to have higher breast cancer rates. In fact, there was like, I think the World Health Organization said that shift work is a type of a carcinogen, right? So I would say that women should be careful about shift work. I know that you have to do what you have to do to pay your bills, but if you are doing shift work for many years, it may be a good idea to limit the number of years you're doing it and doing it maybe when you're younger for a few years versus having a 40-year career as a shift worker.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. You're giving us so many great sleep tips and advice. I know a lot of women can develop anxiety around sleep itself, worrying about not falling asleep, which can actually make it harder to sleep, and worrying if we're doing all the right things to get our best sleep. How can someone break the cycle of sleep related anxiety and create a healthier mindset around rest?
Yeah. So paradoxically, worrying about sleep backfires on us, right? So I think that a lot of women who are achievers in life and in their work, they are used to putting in effort and they're practicing and they're used to getting a reward for hard work. And that doesn't work with sleep. So sometimes what we find is that the harder people try to work at it, like if they've gotten a very elaborate evening routine, they're like just doing so many interventions, it can often backfire and make it more difficult to sleep. So it can take time, but I think that if we can remember to have a more relaxed approach to our sleep, sometimes I think that is a better way to go about it. And it's a fine line because on one hand, we want to prioritize our sleep. On the other hand, we don't want to get so wrapped up in the minutia that we become more anxious about our sleep. So, one of the things that seems to work quite well with my clients is mindfulness snacks. And what I mean by this is like taking 5 or 10 minutes a few times a day to disconnect from information. So, we have so much information coming at us all the time that quite often women will go throughout their whole day without any kind of break, any kind of white space or downtime. What ends up happening is that when they get into bed or if they wake up at 3 in the morning, all of those things that they didn't deal with, all of those thoughts and emotions come bubbling up to the surface. So those mindfulness snacks are really a chance for us to invite those things in so that we can process those things so that we're not processing them when we're trying to go to sleep. The mindfulness snack, it's akin to an exercise snack, but for mindfulness, right? So it would look like taking a walk out in nature, meditating, breath work. It would not be scrolling the internet because what that is that's you're inputting information into your brain. Right. You may think you're relaxing, but that's not a relaxing activity.
So it's taking those pauses in our day to just reconnect with ourselves and just allow ourselves to come back into a state of presence, but besides just letting our minds keep racing. I love those little mindfulness breaks or pauses. We know that perimenopause and menopause bring significant hormonal changes that disrupt our sleep, hot flashes, night sweats, mood shifts, you name it. What are your top strategies for helping women manage these sleep challenges during midlife?
Some of them we've already covered, the mindfulness piece, that can be really helpful. There's also the hormone replacement issue. That's like a whole other topic. I know you've done podcasts on
Mhm.
it. If women are really struggling with their sleep and they've done a lot of other interventions, I think it's worth a conversation with your provider to see if maybe replacing the hormones might help your sleep. It doesn't seem to be like a slam dunk for a lot of people, but I think in my experience with the hot flashes and night sweats, it can be really helpful because when you have the hot flashes and night sweats, it's extremely difficult to stay asleep all night. So I think sometimes there's fear from women, like because of so much bad press about a hormone replacement, but I think it's definitely worth a conversation with your doctor.
For sure. In my own personal experience, I definitely saw my sleep improve with hormone therapy. But then life does get in the way. There are so many other issues that do impact our sleep. We talked about nutrition, we talked about movement, you talked about screen time. A big factor is stress. I know that's a big obstacle to getting the sleep that we need. Are there key lifestyle shifts that can make a big difference in terms of addressing stress and how it affects our sleep?
Yeah, I think that sometimes we need to ask for help. I think that we often take on way too much responsibility in our homes, in our workplaces, and we have this sort of I can do it all mentality. So I think that calling in help or just saying, look, can you help me with this? I think that's a really good tactic that I think we forget about sometimes because I think we feel like we have to do it all ourselves. So I would definitely recommend that and rely on your community because we're all in this together as midlife women.
Thank you. You describe yourself as a sleep soulmate, which I absolutely love. What does that mean in your coaching practice, and how does your approach differ from traditional sleep solutions?
Yeah, I think that my approach differs in that I've gone down this journey myself. And so I really understand what it is like to be challenged with sleep. And I think my approach is also different in that I'm a little bit more holistic. So I blend A few different things. So I'm blending in CBTI, which is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which we didn't really touch on. But essentially, what that is, it's a science backed strategy for overcoming insomnia that does not involve psychopharmacology or medication. And its premise is helping us change our behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs about sleep. So I combined that with mindfulness and circadian optimization practices, some of the things that we just talked about. And I feel like the blend of all three has been really a game changer for the women that I'm working with. And some there's some tweaking involved because it's not a one size fits all, which I think is really when you're talking about anything, really any kind of health change, working with a coach can be really impactful because you're able to do little experiments and see what's moving the needle because we know that not the same intervention is going to have the same effect on everybody.
I appreciate that. I know you've had your own experience with weaning yourself off sleeping pills. I know oftentimes if we're going to a doctor's appointment and we're complaining about our sleep quality to a doctor, that's the first line of treatment is sleeping pills. What's the biggest misconception about sleep medications and why do you believe they're not the long-term solution for sleep issues?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that is problematic about sleeping pills is that it really does change the architecture of your sleep. And there's been more and more research lately talking about, and this just came out a couple weeks ago, really impacting your lymphatic system. So it's impacting that waste clearance from your brain. I think that's something that people need to consider when they're thinking about a sleeping medication, like an Ambien, for example. And then also, the efficacy just doesn't seem to be really that solid. They did a study a few years ago showing that women who were taking sleeping pills for 1 to 2 years didn't have really any clinically significant improvements with their sleep overall during that time. And I don't fault the doctors for giving the sleeping pills because, quite honestly, most of them have only had 2 hours of sleep science training. So that's their arsenal. A lot of them don't know how to refer to someone who does CBTI, and they know the doctors know sleep hygiene and sleeping pills, but that's really their repertoire. So it's more of a systemic issue, quite honestly, that the medical schools need to train up physicians on better ways to help their patients deal with sleep problems.
Yes. And so many other aspects that we've talked about on the show, whether it's menopause or sexual health. Doctors are trained with a certain set of skills and prescriptions. So I think really being able to think outside the box and work with a coach like you to bring a more holistic approach is so, so important. I hear reports from women who report side effects from those sleep medications and can worsen other menopausal symptoms like anxiety or even like this sleep disruption that you're talking about. So I'm a big advocate, especially when it comes to sleep for thinking outside the box and looking at other solutions. For women listening right now who feel exhausted, frustrated, and feel like they've tried everything, what's one small actionable step she can take tonight to start sleeping better?
Yeah, I would say if you're not prioritizing your wind down routine, think about doing that and really giving yourself that buffer, half an hour to decompress. I think a lot of women that I'm seeing lately are forgetting that and they're working or doing really stimulating activities right up until bed. And they're like, why can't I fall asleep? They haven't given their brains or bodies that time to wind down. So if you're not doing that, I would say tonight is a good time to start doing that.
And what are some of those good wind down activities that you recommend?
Yeah, there are so many. Reading, meditating, a warm bath has actually been shown to of sleep latency, fall asleep more quickly, maybe gentle stretching. You know what? I watch TV before bed. I know that's really strange and counterintuitive, but I find it very relaxing. I get very sleepy. But what I do, to give some clarification, I wear blue blocking glasses when I watch TV.
Mhm.
I also am very mindful about the content that I'm watching. So I'm watching really light content like food shows, travel shows. There's no news, there's no thrillers. So I think that everyone has their own particular way they want to wind down. And I think you have to figure out what's good for you. Because quite honestly, watching TV for some people could be a disaster, because I think sometimes people want to just continue to watch it, right? And they just keep staying up past like their normal bedtime in order to do that. So I think you need to experiment a little bit and figure out what is the best strategy for you.
But those blue blocking glasses are really a game changer, I feel, if you are going to watch TV. Because I know TV can be a relaxing way to wind down. But yeah, I definitely recommend the blue blocking glasses. They're
Yeah.
great. Morgan, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing such valuable insights. We know sleep is not a luxury, it's a biological necessity that affects every part of your life. And taking these small, consistent steps that you've shared with us can really have a profound impact on our health, our productivity, and our overall quality of life. Before we wrap up, can you tell our listeners where they can learn more about your work, connect with you, or access any resources you offer for improving sleep?
Sure. My website is morganadamswellness.com. You can sign up to have a what I call a free sleep clarity call. It's a consultation just to chat about sleep to see if you may be a good candidate for sleep coaching. You can also download my guide all about 3 a.m. awakenings, which is probably the biggest complaint of all my clients. It's called Awake Again at 3 a.m., your guide to why you're waking up and what to do about it. That is available for free on my website. And you can also connect with me on Instagram. My handle is morganadams.wellness. Shoot me a DM. Don't be a stranger. I love talking about all things sleep.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you today. I have learned so much, and I'm sure I'm off to a better night of sleep tonight because of this conversation. So thank you.
You're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Pleasure in the Pause. Want to help me spread more pleasure in the world? Hit the share episode button and send it to a friend, or post it on your Instagram stories and tag me, Gabriella Espinosa. And if you really love this podcast, please leave a rating or review, as this helps the show get in front of new listeners. Finally, if you would like to access even more pleasure and stay in touch, sign up for my free Pleasure Upgrade Bundle of powerful mind-body practices by going to pleasureinthepause.com. Remember, your pleasure matters.